This is episode number 177 of the Mixology Talk podcast, and we're starting a new month of content and focusing on spirit-free cocktails, non-alcoholic cocktails, mocktails, virgin drinks, whatever you want to call it, basically really interesting drinks without alcohol in them. So we're going to start in an unlikely place, and that is from an Amaro connoisseur turned Amaro maker turned Amaro Soda company founder. And he gives us a lot of insight on how to make your own Amaro at home and his journey into making Amaro Soda. So this is not a sponsored podcast. We just really like the product. And Jason is a really, really insightful person when it comes to flavor extractions and how to go about that process. So there's a lot of interest in here, a lot of great material for kind of everyone, even if you're not interested in non-alcoholic drinks. So stay tuned and hope you enjoy this as much as I did. Cheers. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mixology Talk podcast. So it is just about April, I believe it is. Actually May, I think we're going to May. And we have a new focus of the month. Every month we kind of have a different focus. Last month was a little bit of a cluster with COVID-19 hitting so hard. But this month we're going to try and get back on track with non-alcoholic cocktails. So we have a very special guest today. How you doing, Jason?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you tell us your full name? Because I'm afraid I'm going to butcher it. I have a long history of butchering last names and the company that you own.
So I am Jason LaValla, and I am the founder of Casamara Club.
And Jason was very kind to send out some samples of his products about a month ago, and they were absolutely fantastic. So Casamara is kind of like an Amaro Soda, right?
Yeah. And that was it still is maybe one of the biggest struggles with what this is figuring out what to call it. Mm-hmm. Because it is non-alcoholic. It takes a lot of inspiration from Amaro. So what we landed on was sparkling Amaro soft drink. It's part soda, part seltzer. And a whole lot in between, I guess.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it. We talked before we started recording here, and I found it really great because it's not overly sweet like that tag of soda kind of insinuates there's a lot of sweetness to it. But it's actually more on the kind of dry side. You have some nice bitterness to it, really nice complexity to it. So it drinks more like a dry soda. Like a dry Amaro Soda, basically.
Yes.
So I'm sure I did not help with that at all.
No. I mean, it's I would say you could look at it like a dry soda or a more complex seltzer. Mm-hmm. I think what I'm finding is that everybody sort of sees it and thinks about it a little bit differently, and that's been part of the fun. It also makes it harder to market, but as long as it tastes good and people enjoy it, I'm happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And Julie and I tried the whole lineup and they were all really, really fantastic. So thank you for sending those over. And I can imagine that jumping into making Amaro Soda is not the easiest thing to do. You probably have a long history with Amaro, if I had to guess.
Yeah. So the very first time I tried Amaro, I still remember this so vividly because I was at my favorite craft beer bar. This was probably in 2013 or so. Mm-hmm. And one of my friends was behind the bar, and I noticed that he had this bottle that he would sort of hide off to the side, and it was kind of his like end of the night shift drink. And I just remember thinking, like, what are you doing? You have access to all of this like high quality craft beer. I mean, this was when I think really like as a country, we were starting to see that it wasn't just about IPAs, like getting into sours and farmy stuff. And it was a really exciting time, at least for me anyway, in beer. And so the fact that this guy had some other drink that he was excited about drinking, it definitely piqued my interest. And so one of those days, he offered me some. I remember asking him what it tasted like. And I believe his response, word for word, was, it's not for everyone, but you might like it. And for some reason that always stuck with me as like somewhere between an invitation and a challenge of like, what is this weird thing that like isn't for everyone? And can I be part of that group? And so I tried it. I loved it. It was Vecchio Amaro del Capo. The next, maybe within the next week or so, I happened to find a bottle of Braulio at just a random bottle shop. So I picked that up. And very slowly over the course of, a few months, I kind of found myself picking up anything I could way back when it was not as easy to find Amaro at just about anywhere, really. And so, yeah, that was kind of my introduction to drinking it.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of a common thing that happens is, you start getting friendly with a bartender and they start exposing you to all these things. And all of a sudden, it's kind of like that first one's free, man. Don't worry about it. And next thing you know, you're coming back for more and more and more. Like, what else you got in there?
Yeah. Share more of this knowledge with me. Let's see where else I can go.
Absolutely. And those sound like pretty amazing brands for Amaro. Yeah. And it's a good way to get started for sure. Now, you also mentioned to me that you started making your own Amaro and kind of going down that rabbit hole. Yeah.
So for me, that was like the next step. As I started to exhaust, like, this is what was available in New York City at the time. I started to think more and more about like, well, why do I like this one more than that one? And where are all of these, like, some of these Amari claim to have like over 100 ingredients in them. And that really got me thinking about sort of just flavor on a more granular level. And so my first step in making Amaro was actually I went around to like herb and botanical shops, anywhere I could find them, and just started extracting everything I could separately. I had an entire coat closet that was just full of little 2-ounce jars of everything from like angelica root to mugwort to orange peels and anything I could get my hands on, and sort of just tasting like, oh, when people say this tastes like, I don't know, lavender, this is what they mean. Or this is what lavender tastes like. And now I have a little bit of a reference for the thing on its own. And so from there, the next step was like, well, now I know what each of these flavors tastes like, and I can kind of pick them out of more complex drinks. Maybe I can start putting them together. The very first Amaro I ever made, I think my dad described it as dirty gym socks.
That good, huh?
I tried to defend it as like, that's in right now.
Dirty gym socks are trending hard, Dad.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. I don't know why that stuck out, but now sometimes I'll go back and I'll taste like, I think my favorite Amaro is probably No Nino. And they have like a very low level, very balanced sort of like that almost musky note that you get from some like really nice natural wines. And so now I feel kind of vindicated about my dirty socks.
Oh, that's too funny. So basically, what was your spirit of choice when you're doing extractions? Was it super high proof? Was it more like a brandy? Did you have a particular spirit that you kind of gravitated towards for some of those extractions?
Yeah, so I almost exclusively would use the, is it 190 proof? Just a neutral grain spirit. I would sometimes dilute it down, but
Sure.
for the money anyway, it just made the most sense for getting as much of a control scenario as possible so that I could like really think about each flavor individually. Once I started playing around making Amaro, things got a little bit looser, working with everything from really like wild turkey 101 for extractions.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great thing to extract from.
Yeah, it's just high proof enough, and it brings enough of its own like character that I don't know. I think I've had probably the most fun with that one.
Sure, absolutely. And so basically you're just kind of extracting, keeping these, one of the things I did a long time ago was make a library of tinctures, kind of exactly what you're talking about, spice jars. Yeah. They had like 30 or 35, and I would just draw from them and add just a little bit of flavor to a cocktail if I just needed to kind of give it that pop. So essentially that's kind of how you built it, right? Kind of individual flavors.
Yeah.
And then you started kind of blending together to kind of come up with your own kind of signature Amaro, is kind of what it sounds like.
Yes, that was always sort of the goal, at least early on, I love Amaro. I don't necessarily love my corporate job, so I am going to become an Amaro maker eventually. Sure. I think what I found eventually, though, was that even more than I enjoyed sort of trying to do my own brand new thing, what I really liked doing was looking at an Amaro that I really liked and trying to recreate it in my own style, which just, I don't know what it is, but that my brain seems to work a little bit better when I approach it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so what was, if somebody was going to start making their own Amaro, based on your experience that you've done this, what are some tips that you would give them? Like, what are some of the biggest successes you've seen and some of the biggest failures?
Yeah. I think the best advice that I can give is that, like, if you use a lot of like fresh herbs and orange peels, you cannot go wrong. I almost always approach it from a more, it's really hard to do like an aperitivo style, like a Campari, something like that. Not least because the Canoto is it's not an easy ingredient to get your hands on around here. And so the ones that I found myself enjoying recreating were stuff like Del Capo and Braulio, where it's just a little bit more herbal and sweet and citrusy, the kinds of like Amari for drinking on their own, really.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it's that. I think it's patience, being okay with the fact that a lot of them aren't going to be great. And that's part of the benefit of starting small with individual extractions and blending them together, is that you can, your mistakes, well, it's harder to make mistakes until you start blending. And once you're blending, you can be a little bit more, judicious about how much you're potentially wasting.
Sure. No, and I think that's the smartest approach to this that I've seen so far is, get your library together, start blending, get your formulation right, and then you can start thinking about maybe doing a batch infusions, putting stuff in earlier, heating, that kind of stuff to have a little bit more cohesion between all the ingredients and stuff. And then what's the worst failure you had?
Oh, God. Ooh, okay. So this was once I had started transitioning from making Amaro exclusively to making some bitters too, I tried to do a mole bitters. And oh my God, it was awful. I don't even want to talk about it.
Did it just over extract and just go kind of crazy on you, or was it just so like dark and like out of control?
You know what? It was a while ago, and I wish I still had some so that I could taste it. But all I can remember was it was just incredibly sour and charred, and like all of these flavors that were just totally out of whack. And that was one that I tried to do as a batch extraction.
Sure.
Put everything in at once and let it sit all together for 3 or 4 weeks, as opposed to let's pull each one separately and then put them back together.
Yeah.
Yeah. No matter how long I do it, I still find myself like biting off a little bit more than I can chew occasionally.
Which is good though. That's how we kind of progress and learn and all that. I think mine was when experimenting with cocktails, I made a couple of sodas, like fermented sodas, with yeast, the whole 9 yards. And I didn't have a release valve in my bottles.
Oh, no.
So some of them exploded. I remember one night I came home. I've shared this on the podcast a couple times before, but I made a celery soda, which was fantastic. It was so good. Nice, fresh celery flavor. And I came home from work one day thirsty. I popped it open. It was one of the, like a growler, basically. And I'd probably been drinking. I had some food, and I was like, oh, that looks so refreshing. I opened it up, and the whole thing was so pressurized it shot. I'm not joking. Straight up my face. Oh. You could see like the outline of my face in the ceiling with all the soda. It was amazing. It was glorious. And I wish I caught that on video, but unfortunately I didn't. So that was my biggest failure for sure. The soda itself was delicious.
And it sounds like you got to drink some really fast.
Very quickly. Yeah. Exactly. That's awesome. So you kind of moved from Amaro and making Amari to doing your non-alcoholic and Amaro Soda. So how did that kind of transition? Because I could see like somebody getting like really stuck in Amaro and being like, all right, I got my formulations down right. I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to go produce an American style Amaro.
Yeah. I think there were a few things that sort of slowed me down. I think one of them was the very simple fact of starting an alcohol business in this country is harder than starting non-alcohol. Yeah. Just the horror stories I'd heard about people, you send in your first application to the TTB to get your labels approved, and it can take like the better part of a year. Yeah. So that scared me off a little bit, but I think more fundamentally, the scariest thing was that there were already a bunch of like really solid American Amaro makers, and they were all kind of doing the sorts of things that I would have been excited to be doing. Sure. And that made me think like, well, if I don't have anything interesting to say here, then maybe I should take a step back and find another way that I can be a part of this conversation.
Sure.
Because for me anyway, the goal was more about making this thing that I like more widely known and more accessible and just easier to find and easier to, talk to people about. Sure. And so what eventually kind of hit me was I had sort of developed this like daily ritual of usually around like 4:30, 5 o'clock, get up from my desk, go to the shared kitchen at the office I was working at, and I would grab a seltzer. Mm-hmm. And I would kind of find that the quality of that little 10-minute break varied based on the quality of the seltzer. And so some of the lower quality ones, I would find myself like I would sit right back at my desk and just get back to emails or like even just surfing the web kind of mindlessly. But the higher quality ones, and especially once I started mixing, like probably my favorite at that time was Spindrift Seltzer. Mm-hmm. It's just sparkling water and juice. And I started adding bitters to that. And I would find myself just sitting and thinking about the drink as opposed to like surfing the web or answering emails. And that's kind of when it hit me of like, oh, I want a better quality non-alcoholic drink that makes me feel maybe the way that I can feel when I drink something something with alcohol, something a little bit more lovingly crafted with flavor in mind as the primary goal, as opposed to so many soft drinks. The primary goal is 0 calorie, or it's like, I don't know, brain boosting or gut health or energy drinks. Like, they all have to be functional in some way or another.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they end up losing sight of flavor. And that was the one thing that I felt like I knew was flavor. And so, yeah, that's when I started making bitters, with the idea of like, bitters and soda should be in a bottle, because that's what I want to drink when I'm not drinking.
So how did you manage the extractions then? Because up to this point, you've been making extractions through alcohol. So how did you kind of pivot to making kind of a soda then at that point?
Yeah. So at that point, I started looking around at all of there's like this vast network of flavor houses and extraction facilities, like all across the country. And I started looking at the ones that were supplying most of the beverages in this country. And most of those natural flavors come from flavor houses, where they are buying pure extracts and sort of reconfiguring them with whatever cheap stuff, natural stuff they can find, to make a cheaper, more consistent supply of, say, something that tastes like oranges, as opposed to just using the orange extract itself. Right. And so I went a step back from them, found out who their suppliers were, and started working with one of this like little, I don't even know how to describe it other than it's this little lab. It's an offshoot of a much larger business that does a bunch of like flavor processing. But just this small group of I don't know, they're kind of the like the fun ones.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I got to know those guys, and they do all of our extracts in the same kind of the facility where you would get the sort of component parts to make like the natural essences or natural flavors that you'd find in Coca-Cola or LaCroix. But the only difference is when I work with them, they get to use like the kinds of weird ingredients that nobody ever orders.
Nice.
Yeah. So I feel like, I don't know. I hope that I make their lives a little bit more fun.
Well, by reading the labels of some of the ingredients that you have in there, I'm sure they're like, what the hell is this? What is this guy doing, man?
Yeah, no, that was sort of the very first reaction. That was the first thing they knew about me, was the order that I placed. And they were like, he wants what?
Like, they're probably like, nobody ever wants that stuff. What can we send this dude? I bet he'll try it.
Yeah. So I think that was I don't know. That was my favorite little detail about that part of the process.
I bet they loved it though. I bet you immediately piqued their interest.
I think so. I think they love me and they hate me. Because it's like, wait a second. We do all of these other ones all of the time. We know exactly like how to slot them into our production schedule. And then you come in here with juniper berry, like, right. Hold on.
Oh, that's awesome. So once you kind of found them and you kind of got a relationship going with them, it was a matter of kind of doing the same thing that you've been doing with Amari, and then kind of reformulating it for a soda at that point.
Yeah, it was, and that's really where, as much as the blending that I did at home for Amaro was, scientific-ish. Yeah. Once I started working with these guys, I probably did 100 to 150 variations of each flavor. Just slowly building and putting together like 2 or 3 ingredients, and then you add a 4th and it all falls apart. And then it's like, okay, let's try it again. And we do the same A and B, but now we try, D instead of C, and very slowly piecing together like, okay, I know that if I have this much Kenoto, I want this much juniper. Now how much allspice goes with the two of those together, and kind of really piecing it together until, and I'm sure you understand this, like there is a certain indescribable moment when just everything comes together and you just get that balance and you're like, well, that's done. And you just know. It takes, especially early on, it took me so long to get to that point.
So how long were you drinking these experimental sodas for until you came up with your lineup?
Too long. I think that was a solid 3 months.
Wow.
And I would bet you the first 6 weeks were just me and Alta, which is kind of our Negroni flavor. Because for a while I thought that we would just come out with one flavor, until I got some really great advice from a friend, kind of mentor in the industry, who said, if you only have one flavor, they're only going to give you one spot on the shelf. If you have 4,
makes sense,
you get a whole billboard of 4 side by side. And so that got me thinking about like, well, I know I want Negroni seltzer. What other kinds of seltzers do I want? And that's how the line sort of filled out from there.
Yeah, and they're all really good. I think the Negroni was definitely, we opened that one and we're like, that's a Negroni. Like the flavor profile and everything was very dead on. I think you had another one that was Aperol, if I'm not mistaken, like an Aperol spritzer style.
Yeah, that
Maybe
one's
you could
kind
talk
of
about kind of your lineup and kind of go through each flavor profile, if you don't mind, real quick.
Yeah, no, not at all. So we've already sort of mentioned Alta, which is the Negroni style. Sarah is the purplish one. It is kind of inspired by a friend of mine, runs a bar in Detroit, and they really like to infuse their Aperol with cinnamon.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and just that idea of grapefruit and cinnamon together really like excited me. And so, I ended up building that one as like I noticed that Aperol plus cinnamon kind of made me felt more like I was drinking an after dinner drink than a before dinner drink, just because of that like intense sort of woody, soothing note that the cinnamon brings in. And so I thought about like, what would the nighttime version of an Aperol spritz look like? And so that's cool. Kind of where Sarah came in. Capo is that's the green one. It is sort of dually inspired by Braulio and Vecchio Amaro del Capo, and that's an accident. I was sort of looking at recreating each of them as their own thing, but I don't know how many iterations in. I noticed I was like crossing my wires, and I was sort of doing a hybrid of both of them.
Which sounds delicious.
And that's what we ended up with. And what kind of occurred to me was that even though we have like, Braulio's from up north, Del Capo's from down south, but they are both from very mountainous regions. They're both reliant on, herbs and oranges. They're both fairly like floral and minty, and like they've got a little bit more body than most. And so that one turned out to be like this really nice springtime. Some people say it tastes like fancy Sprite, which I love. That's probably my favorite tasting note. Although that's, what my other favorite tasting notes. There's Alta. Somebody once said it tastes like a red Slurpee, which love.
Cool.
And then there's Onda, which we haven't talked about yet. That is the one that an older man at a bar once described to my friend who served it to him as, this is what you give to a sick horse. and Onda is my favorite of the four, but it is definitely the most polarizing. People always ask me, like, what's my favorite, as if that's going to be the one they want to try. And so I always have to warn them, like, this is my favorite because it's the weird one.
Right.
And I think that's in part because we use a lot of rhubarb root and a lot of sage. And in the Sarah, for example, I think the rhubarb root really blends nicely with the grapefruit, and it almost makes this like, it almost tastes kind of desserty. Whereas with the Onda, what I really love is the rhubarb sort of stands out on its own, and I get this really nice, like, intense, woodsy forest floor thing from it, alongside the sage, which is just kind of like that. It doesn't. Some of my favorite advice that I got when I was formulating Onda was that sage doesn't belong in non-alcoholic drinks, and I think that's right. But that's why I love it so much. It's just, Ondas continues to surprise me every time I drink it. And I think that's why it's my favorite, because I'll never get bored of it.
So you could also use that as your tagline from the bartender that introduced you to Amari. When you talk about Onda, you say, it's not for everyone, but you might like it.
Yeah. Or you're, at the very least, your sick horse might like it.
Right. Absolutely. That's hilarious. I noticed that didn't make it on the marketing material for some reason.
No. And you know what? I even asked him, do you give it to the horse to make him better, or it's like to put him down? And he very graciously told me that it actually does make the horse feel better.
Oh, hey, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. I feel like I got a win out of that situation.
Oh, that's too funny. And thank you for sharing that. That's pretty amazing. I've had those moments when I've started crafting cocktails, and after a while I just kind of go down this rabbit hole, and I think it's great, and I convince myself it's so good, and then I give it to that first person to try it, and they're like, what the hell are you thinking, dude? What is going on up there? Like, oh yeah, this is terrible. Then I have to dial it back a little bit.
Yeah, I think, to be totally honest, that was like probably the most important part of my process. Is I would finish for the day and I'd be like, I don't know if I can continue to do this, and then I would share it with a friend, and they'd be like, you might want to keep going.
I appreciate your honesty, but I kind of hate you right now. So, we're still
Why do you keep giving me these?
Right. Oh, that's too funny. So I know that you're kind of a non-alcohol soda company, but have you found that these mix well with other ingredients, alcoholic ingredients, for like a quick cocktail, like a 2-part cocktail or anything like that?
Absolutely. Probably my favorite thing to do is make an Americano. So 1 Campari, 1 sweet vermouth, rocks, and fill up the glass with Alta. And you end up with this like double strength Americano with a little bit of a juniper note. And it's easier than making a spritz.
Damn,
you don't have to open up a whole bottle of Prosecco. It's perfect. I think beyond that, I like Onda with Montenegro.
Oh, yeah.
Sarah, I really like to use as the grapefruit soda in a Paloma.
Ooh.
And Capo is really nice with just on its own, like a Spanish style vermouth and soda.
Yeah, because this is one of the things I struggle with just effervescent style cocktails, is you don't have these complicated flavors that typically go with effervescent sodas. So you're adding basically water into a cocktail that has so much flavor and kind of diluting it down. So with your Americano and the Onda Montenegro, I could see that just like 2 powerhouses coming up against each other. And the benefit is a much more amazing drink at the end, because you're having all these complexities from the spirit, you're having all these complexity from the soda, and they're just kind of weaving themselves together in a really beautiful way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to have to try that. The Americano plus the Alta, I think, is going to be on my hit list tonight.
It took me way longer than I would care to admit, before I actually was comfortable mixing these, because you put something out into the world with a very specific idea of what it is and what it's for. And for like months, the first question I would get was like, oh, can I mix it? Is it for mixing? And I would say, no, drink it. I promise it's for drinking. But you can start hearing that question often enough. And bartenders started coming to me with like, hey, check out what I did.
Nice.
And that sort of got the juices flowing for me of like, oh, all right, maybe it's a mixer too.
Right. And I think I saw on your website that you actually offer larger volumes of the syrup. Is that correct for industry?
Yeah. So we just started doing this. The original idea was that this was going to be this sort of thing that, bars and restaurants can then put on a soda gun. Obviously that's, we're in a place where that's not super useful right now. And so now it's available on the website for anybody who wants that much Alta.
Sure.
Cause it's about, it's a 5-gallon, bag of syrup.
Okay.
And, it makes about 30 gallons of soda. So it's a lot.
Well, and you got to have the equipment for that too, right? You got to have the tanks and.
Yeah, I probably am not supposed to say this, but I have found that these bags with like, you get some needle nose pliers, you can kind of pull off the stopper.
Okay.
You can pour it out and then reseal it. And so that is partially how I've been using them is, I'll pour out a little bit into a, mason jar and then use that for playing around with mixing cocktails or just making my own soda at home.
Sure. And I bet the concentrate is a really beautiful way to kind of incorporate that into a cocktail.
It really is. And it kind of going back to what you were saying about sort of tall drinks. And I guess some of the limitations of a tall drink are that even if you are doing it with our sodas, you're still diluting your base spirit by, a fairly significant amount. Whereas with the syrup, you can make a stirred cocktail or, I haven't done a sour with it yet, but now I'm thinking I might have to do that.
Yeah. Like a nice egg white sour. I bet that would be super good.
I'm trying to think like an Alta syrup in a, like a Ramos gin fizz. For the next time I've got like half an hour to make a cocktail.
and you haven't gone to the gym yet. Like, let us know how that turns out because it sounds super good.
I think I'm going to have to do that this weekend.
There you go.
I've been, one of my friends challenged me to see who could do the better lift. And he won by 2 inches.
Wow.
So I feel like I really have to go out and seek redemption now. And this is the way to do it.
Absolutely.
I'll shake with the Alta syrup and I will use the Alta soda for the lift. And it's going to be...
That's going to be screaming good. I think it's going to be really tasty. Cool. So we've talked a lot about kind of the processes behind it, and you've shared a lot of your experiences with us. The path that you've taken to get to this point. And I really enjoy your sodas. And like I said, I really appreciate the samples. Now, if somebody's listening on the podcast and they want to try it on their own, what's the best way to kind of get access to your bottlings, your products, things that you sell?
So my favorite way to get it into people's hands is through our network of distributors. We work with folks in about 10 or 11 states. You go to our website, CasamaRaClub.com. You go to the Find page. You'll see all the states where we are distributed and the people that distribute us. And if you can't find it in a grocery store or, your favorite bar or restaurant that's sort of shifted to a curbside model, you can always reach out to me. You can email me through the website or through our Instagram, which is just @Casamara Club. I can always put you in touch with like the people who might know where you can find it in your hometown. But if that sounds like too much work, you can also buy it from our website, which is CasamaraClub.com. We ship all across the country. We are working on being able to ship internationally. But it's never realized how expensive that is. So
it's crazy. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll have show notes, or we'll have the links to Casamara Club in the show notes, and the Instagram handle, so people can check out the lineup and kind of what you guys are doing over there. Now, is there anything that you'd like to plug? Anything you want to promote from your end?
Ooh, let's see. Besides the sodas, let's see. I'm working on a really fun project right now in Detroit with some friends. We don't quite have a handle for it yet, but the guy who's organizing it, his name's Tracy, runs an organization called the It's Not Right movement, and they are working on educating folks about not just how to make your workplace safer, but how to respectfully demand a safer workplace if you're not in the position to make those changes yourself. And he's still building all of that out, but like he's working on creating like some really great resources for the hospitality industry.
Very cool.
I'm very excited about that.
Cool. And then when you get that up and running and have a place to kind of point people towards, let me know, and we can put those hopefully in the show notes, and people can find out more about that information.
Cool. I will.
Awesome. Well, Jason, you've given us a lot of your time and a lot of your deep knowledge from an Amaro maker, which I appreciate, and some great stories, man. I love it. And we can't thank you enough for your time. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me as well. And we'll definitely include all the links to Casamara Club in the show notes, and look forward to the next podcast.
Cool. Thanks so much.
So once again, thank you, Jason, for your time and lending your expertise and kind of your journey as an Amaro connoisseur maker, and eventually Amaro Soda maker as well. And once again, this is not a sponsored podcast. We just really enjoyed the product, and he's a really interesting person to talk to. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Now, if you kind of geeked out on the formulation side of things and the extraction side of the conversation, I highly recommend joining one of our groups. Head on over to abarabove.com/groups. We actually have two. One for cocktail connoisseurs, cocktail nerds, basically everybody that loves cocktails, and we have one that's really industry focused. We have interesting conversations like this happening in both groups all the time. Feel free to join both, and you can find them over at abarabove.com/groups, and the show notes over at mixologytalk.com/177. We'll have some more podcasts for you guys in the future, and until then, I hope you're staying safe, healthy, happy, and enjoying a couple of great drinks along the way. So cheers, and we'll talk to you all soon.